This is Strat-Edgy, and I want to talk to you about something that really corns my hole. Censorship. I have a very deliberate and targeted hate for this kind of thing, yet at the same time I go back and forth with my beliefs. See, some things I self-censor, like hate speech, shit like that. When I see something I don't like, I hit the back button, turn off my console, shove broccoli in my ears and shout, "Nah, nah, 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 I can't hear you," until the bad man or woman goes away. I also censor in a lot of other ways, except when I get drunk. I self-censor because, well, not everybody appreciates my type of humor, which is a goddamn shame because I think I'm hilarious, and if more people would think that I'm hilarious, I could go to sleep at night without crippling feelings of inadequacy. But let us now talk about the real censorship, the kind of censorship that comes from corporations and governments, the kind that affects you in a real way. I don't mean the kind of silencing that comes from somebody shouting you down with a bullhorn. What happens when a company as large as Steam starts censoring games it finds distasteful? Aside from the obvious answer of, we would stop seeing distasteful games, we could also find ourselves in some crazy upside-down world where mice live in cats' mouths and people from Boston can learn how to say "ka" without sounding like they got a football jammed in their mouth. If governments get into the habit of regulating your industry, you can guarantee the silence that is accompanied by the failure to get a permit to make game, or permit to sell game, or permit to have a company that make game. Licensing, permits, oversight, regulation, and censorship. This is the bureaucracy at work. And if you find yourself under the microscope of the government, you might want to think about self-regulation. But if you self-regulate and censor too much, you miss out on games like, well, Riot, Civil Unrest, as this game might be considered too edgy for the time it comes out in, or the mindset of the public at large at the time. Now, people have been asking me to talk about this Steam censorship issue for a while now, and I have actually got like 3 or 4 requests just in Discord to talk about it. So even though this issue has pretty much taken care of itself, I want to examine why Steam allowing basically anything on its platform is actually dangerous to Steam and to us as gamers. In order for me to comment on this, I must do research, because to be honest, when I saw this in my newsfeed, I ignored it. My basic opinion on this is if Steam wants to self-regulate, they should. Because if they don't, and the public outrage is high enough, the government will step in, and in this video I will show you hopefully why I think that is. So strap in, folks, and get in my time-traveling van. First we will talk about a name that is infamous in gaming, and that is everyone's beloved charlatan and ambulance chaser, Jack Thompson. You remember Jack Thompson? Yeah. On the surface, he was one of those guys fighting what he saw was a tide of immoral behavior that was being massaged and nurtured by a violent and complicit media. He attacked everyone from shock jocks like Howard Stern and widely thought of the asshole who was responsible for me not being able to get that 2 Live Crew album when I was young and had no musical taste. Luther Campbell, member of 2 Live Crew, once stated in a Los Angeles Times interview that his group was being targeted because of a concentrated effort on behalf of Jack Thompson to unseat Janet Reno, the incumbent prosecutor at the time, and person he tried to get a job with, and got turned down because he's a shitty lawyer. Luther Campbell and his group came out in support of Janet in one of their albums. Now, according to Luther, Jack had been after them ever since they released that album. In 1990, the owner of EC Records, Charles Freeman, was arrested for selling copies of the 2 Live Crew album, as nasty as they want to be. He was the first person to be arrested in southern Florida for this particular crime. Under Florida law, selling this particular album was a first-degree misdemeanor, and if he was convicted, he would face a $1,000 fine and a year in prison. Despite this, Freeman continued to sell the album in defiance of the unconstitutional ban. In his own words, Freeman said, "How can they arrest me for selling 2 Live Crew and not arrest me for selling Andrew Dice Clay and NWA? Freeman, stop giving him ideas, dude." In 1992, legal fees ensuing from the court case forced him to sell his record store. He was behind $6,600 in rent and racked up about $60,000 in credit card debt. In desperate times, Freeman turned to selling crack and was arrested. He pled guilty and was sentenced to 18 fucking years. This man, Jack Thompson, who managed to ruin lives of people he never met, fancies himself, according to the Los Angeles Times article, the Batman that America needs. He drinks from a Batman mug, wears a Batman watch, and watches with eyes unseen from the closet, dressed as Batman while guys rail out his wife. He's not the hero we need, nor the hero we deserve. He's probably most infamous for going after Rockstar Games during the whole hot coffee debacle, in which an industrious group of sweaty hackers unlocked the fuck your girlfriend mode in Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. Nothing like watching what amounts to triangles bumping into each other to give a 12-year-old a boner. Wait, I can't say that on YouTube. Okay, wait, okay, I'm gonna erase that. Okay, alright. Jack Thompson essentially made his career fucking around with Rockstar Games, trying to pressure the government into regulating the industry. His basic argument was that there was a link between every school shooting and the fact that these kids were gamers. He pointed to studies that were and weren't peer-reviewed and misrepresented facts. His crusade led to media attention and later, the attention of the government, who had congressional hearings. Hillary Clinton suggested that government should regulate the industry, and that is when the ESRB changed GTA's rating from M for mature to adults only. Rockstar Games was targeted by a class action lawsuit from the city of Los Angeles for failing to disclose the nature of the content of the game. Class action lawsuit for fraud, and then they settled with the FTC, and as a part of that settlement, they were made to fully and clearly disclose the content of the game in the packaging and promotion. Rockstar was also forced to pay nearly $1 million out to the Parent-Teacher Association and the ESRB. And in a massive blow to the bottom line, Rockstar settled the securities lawsuit that was associated to the hot coffee incident to the tune of $20 million. Talk about a kick in the nuts. And as a result of this, and because Rockstar are some fucking gangsters, in response to Jack Thompson saying that they were incapable of releasing a good game that wasn't violent, Rockstar published a game called Table Tennis. A middle finger to Jack Thompson, and some would say, a middle finger to everyone. They actually released a game where you play as a professional table tennis person who plays table tennis. What happened as a result was most companies across the industry started regulating in the same way. They saw the example that was made of Rockstar, and content that would normally be locked away on a disc that was difficult and time-consuming to remove was now being purged from finals just so they could be sure that they couldn't be held liable for someone hacking their game. This pressure led to the gaming industry self-regulating their content. And this was just over a mode in a game that had been locked away, data mined by players, hacked, and featured two polygonal shapes, both fully clothed, bumping into each other. How about in 2015 when a group of teachers from a school in Cheshire, United Kingdom, threatened parents via a letter that they could be reported to authorities for allowing their children to play games like Call of Duty and Grand Theft Auto. They talk about violence and sexual content, but man, do they ever focus on the sexual content in the letter. I mean, they act like these games are that they actually have sex in them. I mean, all because of Grand Theft Auto and a scene that was cut out of a game. I mean, think about it like this. In America, we've cut funding for Planned Parenthood, which is crazy because, I mean, don't you want parenthood to be planned? I mean, who's happy when their 15-year-old gets pregnant? Anyway, games are not smutty sex simulators made to train our children on how to have sex or what positions to have sex in or how to talk an alien out of her clothes so you can ejaculate into her mind. That's not really the purpose of games. I mean, they act like the entire purpose of these games is to go through the dialogue options between missions so you can convince Hannah from Dexter to take her top off. That's just not what games are for. It's an art form that allows you to explore deep into characters. Imagine what would happen when a school shooting simulator comes out around the same time of another school shooting. Well, you don't have to imagine. It's happened. And more than once. But let's fast forward a bit to 2018, where the latest troll fiasco has emerged to put the gaming industry under the spotlight once more. Now let's get serious for a moment. Parents that lose their children to tragedy go through all the same stages of loss that anyone goes through, except what they have lost is a part of them. A part of them that has inherited a little bit from dad and a little bit from mom and is on their way to becoming a little bit more of themselves. Now imagine that someone comes along one day and takes that human from you for no other reason that they had access to a weapon to do it, or they were off their meds, or had a vendetta, or felt picked on, or whatever still unjustifiable reason a person who could do this kind of thing needs to justify their actions. Imagine then that people thought this was funny, a punchline, or entertainment, that your suffering is funny or fun to them. This would push you right into the anger phase of loss, and in 2018, that is just what we saw. Parent groups, justified in their anger, essentially forced Steam, for the moment, to rethink their hands-off approach to moderation. And in typical Steam fashion, they just threw their hands up and said, fuck it, we don't want to moderate the content. Which is the issue with an open platform like YouTube or Steam. It is open to everyone, even dickheads. And the amount of shit to good ratio that results is far too much for any human or company of humans to regulate. But let's talk about jokes for a minute. Now, I'll be the first person to laugh at any joke. If it's funny in some way, I might feel bad for laughing at it eventually, but in the moment I can't help it. It's because there's a layer of abstraction between me and whatever is being made fun of. Usually because it holds some truth stretched to absurdity in it. Or because it plays on a well-worn stereotype that I happen to think is hilarious. It's the same kind of laugh I get from seeing an old racist cartoon, like I'm taking in the irony and laughing that people can be that dumb. I've had some time to ponder this, and I think that people's reactions come down to experience. See, to me, all funny jokes are funny regardless of content. But depending on the person telling you the joke, that content can vary because there is a difference between telling a joke and believing the joke. Both gets laughs, but one comes from a much darker place. So for instance, there's a difference between Louis C.K. using the N-word to prove a point and Kramer from Seinfeld yelling it at a crowd member. One is rooted in irony or satire, and the other is rooted in a belief that you must backpedal on quicker than Steve Irwin climbing a tree to get away from a Komodo dragon. This relates to our school shootings in a way, but in the inverse. It has been a while since the 9/11 attacks happened, but you can make a joke about it to someone and they might laugh. But I can't think of a single person who's lost a loved one in the attacks that could laugh about it. Time doesn't heal all wounds. You see, it's getting to the point where mass murder is more and more common in America, so the public consciousness is thinking about it constantly. We're all waiting with resignation for the next horrible piece of news to tell us that more children died. As I hope I've shown you, with enough public support, laws can be made in response that reduce our freedom. We, as gamers, share a great platform for art, discussion, and the exploration of ideas that we can directly interact with. If we censor too much, we lose our freedom. It's a weird topic for me because, as I said, I sort of go back and forth on it. I honestly err on the side of total freedom, except that which does physical harm. But what about mental harm? This is when our freedom of speech butts up against our empathy and need to protect people from harm. Our freedom of speech is perhaps the most important right that we have, and the whole point of this rant is that any right abused is a right the government seeks to limit. If we aren't careful and start self-censoring, we could be staring down the eye of our great overlords with us standing beneath the gavel that lays us flat. This has been a rant from Strat-Edgy, and now that you heard it, go have a long, hard think about that.